Hello, folks, and welcome back to 10-Minute Elections. Again, I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. I know, obviously, this is such a crazy time in America with both the protests and the ongoing situation with the pandemic. So, here today on Monday, the 1st of June 2020, I bring you my first Senate projection of the election cycle. So, I have filled in the safe states, and they're not the safe states that you may be used to seeing. Certainly, a lot of states that are safe for the GOP on the presidential level, namely Alaska, Montana, Kansas, Alabama, and Kentucky, none of these are safe. All of them are safe on the presidential level. And for the Democrats, there are actually two Senate seats I rate as safe that are likelies on the presidential level, those being New Mexico and Virginia. So the 16 remaining seats are the ones that are going to decide Senate control. And so let's go west to east. This is going to be a two-part series. We'll go from Alaska to Minnesota and Iowa today. Then on Wednesday, we'll pick up where we left off. And on Friday, we will be discussing Joe Biden's potential running mates. So no state of the day this week. All right, let's start with Alaska. This is a state where Republican incumbent Dan Sullivan is taking on Democrat-backed independent orthopedic surgeon and commercial fisherman Al Gross. This is a state where JHK gives Sullivan about a 90% chance to win. I think this is about right. He's been leading in the sparse polling that there has been, but this is certainly a race it could certainly surprise people. This is a state where Al Gross has more of a shot than most, especially for the lean of the state. And I think this is a race that Democrat and Republican establishments will generally ignore, but I rate this one as likely. No, I'm sorry, Republican likely, because I think it will certainly dip below that 15% margin. Probably not the 5% margin, but it could potentially become competitive. Going now to the state of Arizona, Mark Kelly, husband of former Representative Gabby Giffords and astronaut, absolutely prolific fundraiser for the Democrats. He has outraised every other candidate, Democrat and Republican, for Senate in 2020. So, absolutely prolific fundraiser. Probably, even though 2018 was a bit more of a blue wave than 2020 is projected to be, I actually give him a better chance of winning the seat than Kirsten Sinema in her win over Martha McSally in 2018, simply because of how much and how rapidly the state's demographics have changed. Again, Maricopa County, as we discussed in the presidential election video, generally what's going to be deciding elections here, and it's certainly trending blue. This is a state that I'm going to rate lean D, just like on the presidential level, but actually more so on the presidential level. I think there's an argument as a tilt or even a toss-up, but this one, it's going to land squarely in the lean category with Kelly up with a significant advantage in the polling data. All right, similar somewhat situation in Colorado. A Republican defeated a Democrat incumbent, so that Republican incumbent now is Cory Gardner, who, really being a Republican incumbent in certainly a blue state in Colorado, he needed to distance himself from the Trump administration and the McConnell establishment. And in that way, he has, at least statistically and with regard to his votes and whatnot, he has failed. He is going up in a blue state where Trump is certainly very unpopular. He's going up against a very popular former Democratic governor in John Hickenlooper and brief 2020 presidential candidate. So, assuming Hickenlooper wins his primary, and even if Andrew Romanoff ends up getting the upset in the primary, this is still going to be squarely in that lean Democrat territory. I don't buy the polls that have Hickenlooper up by as much as 17, 18 points, but I would not be surprised at all if he were to win this race by double digits. Going up to the state of Montana now, where moderately popular, not too much either way, fairly unknown Republican incumbent Steve Daines faces off against briefly 2020 presidential candidate and extraordinarily popular moderate Democratic outgoing governor Steve Bullock. So it's the battle of the Steves up here. And in 2018, I would give Steve Bullock a tilt or lean margin. I think he is certainly the best chance Democrats have, and really the only chance Democrats have ever had of taking back this seat in Montana, to where if he wins, the state of Montana will actually be sending 2 Democrats to the U.S. Senate, at least until 2024, with John Tester up for re-election, or his seat up for election again, rather. So, because this is a presidential election year and Trump will probably sway the race in Dane's favor, I'm going to rate the race as a tilt Republican, but it won't go Republican by nearly the margins as we see on the presidential level, and this is certainly one that could flip and certainly a race to keep an eye on. Going down now to the state of Kansas. Boy, this one is a real wild card because in the GOP primary we have somewhat neck and neck, although I would give the former the slight edge. We have former Kansas Secretary of State and deeply unpopular conservative Chris Kobach and pretty establishment representative Roger Marshall. All the other candidates have pretty token polling numbers, and they'll probably drop out, likely coalescing around Roger Marshall eventually, as Susan Waggle already did, the Kansas Senate president. So, Chris Kobach, in 2018, for some perspective, lost by about a point the governor's race to Democrat Laura Kelly in Kansas. Laura Kelly was nothing exceptional, it's just that that's how deeply unpopular Chris Kobach is, especially with moderate, kind of the George W. Bush brand of conservatives that are really common throughout the state of Kansas. So if Chris Kobach actually manages to win the primary, he will go up against Democratic State Senator Barbara Bollier, a former Republican who changed parties in 2018 over opposition to Donald Trump and his policies, and certainly an uber centrist. This is probably the best chance that Democrats are going to get in the state of Kansas. So if Marshall wins the primary, this is going to be a safe GOP seat. It's Kansas. It'll go 15 plus points easily. If Kobach wins the nomination, the Kansas state level GOP, which has been desperately trying to sway the nomination in Marshall's favor, is going to really need to buckle down here, and because this race will be competitive, very competitive, if Chris Kobach is the nominee, I would probably rate it as a tilt Republican, given the fact that Barbara Bollier has actually been leading in the state of Kansas polling data. So right now I'm going to split the difference, rate this as a likely Republican, but this is certainly a race that all eyes are on, especially the GOP primary, which, again, Marshall wins, safe GOP. Kobach wins, you could basically call it a toss-up. Going down now to the state of Texas, which is a state that a lot of Democratic activists and party members have expressed optimism in. At the presidential level, sure, and John Cornyn is not the most popular incumbent, and MJ Hager is a pretty good candidate. But Donald Trump will help John Cornyn's cause. John Cornyn is not as unpopular as Ted Cruz, and MJ Hager, while a decent candidate for the Democrats, is no Beto O'Rourke. The Democrats have a very feasible path to the Senate majority. It simply doesn't run through Texas. This is going to be characterized as a likely Republican, could possibly become competitive, but it is unlikely. So going up now to the state of Iowa. Deeply unpopular. Well, I shouldn't say deeply unpopular, but she is quite unpopular, and her approval rating is not good at all. For freshman Senator Joni Ernst faces Teresa Greenfield in her first re-election bid. So Ernst, largely a rank and file, serving with Senate President pro tempore Chuck Grassley, and she is going to receive actually not as much help from Trump in the state as others, because this is a state that Trump really isn't going to pay as much attention to, simply because if Trump's losing Iowa, he's got much, much bigger problems to worry about. This is a likely GOP state on the presidential level. It will vote left of that in the Senate race, but this certainly can be chalked up as a lean Republican. Don't really see any argument to make it further to the left or right. One more state for today, and that's the state of Minnesota, where Tina Smith, who won the special election in 2018 for the remainder of the term vacated by the resignation of Al Franken, token GOP opposition in her re-election bid. So this is a seat that, again, if Democrats lose, they have bigger problems to worry about, and Republicans' path to keeping the majority does not go through Minnesota. So for this reason, this really isn't going to be a race that's focused on. I'm rating this as a likely that will vote left of the presidential race. So I hope you guys enjoyed. This concludes Monday's episode regarding the Senate map. We'll continue on Wednesday. starting with Alabama and working our way up to Maine. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Stay safe.